All right, what's up, everybody? This is another episode, another class we have, political CMB political education. Today we're going to be going over an interesting text. We're going to dive deeper on the question of repatriation, and so I chose this book here because it's one of the only books I know that went deep inside it, for deep inside the context or the theme of repatriation, and looked at it from these kind of different angles, like a historical angle. And we wanted to start to look at the actual cases of repatriation and what does it mean, and what historical presence it's had for our people, maybe what is its failures, what has been its successes, and really try to come to a conclusion. Well, maybe not a conclusion, but really just try to wrap our brains around what the significance of repatriation in our struggles, Black liberation struggle as a whole. And so I thought that this book was a really good introduction into explaining the concept as a whole. So with that being said, of course, I always start off with was there any initial thoughts on the book before we began?
I'll just say real quick that I definitely enjoyed the text because he took a historical viewpoint. He went back to the very first African American that actually took Africans from America to the continent, and then he walked you through that all the way to the impact of the Haitian Revolution and so forth. So I thought it was an interesting book or interesting couple chapters as far as the history about it and some of the political commentary he had as well. So yeah, it was pretty interesting.
It's always important to look at history, like history being the best teacher of these things. Sometimes we look at things from this political or like ideological viewpoint, which is good, because to me it's almost like motivating. But I think it's always important to back up what we're saying with historical knowledge, right? It's like evidence to conclude to whatever you're trying to say, and I think that's very important in terms of coming to a conclusion, right? And so with that being said, I want to start off by really looking at that first person, Paul Coffey, Kufi, I think that's how you say his name. And it says on this page, 7 years after Haiti obtained its independence, a prominent self-made businessman, Paul Coffey, began planning for a voyage to Africa that would both repatriate free Africans to the continent and establish commerce between Africans on the continent and those in America. By 1815, Kofi personally transported 38 Africans to the British colony of Sierra Leone. First, he believed that returning Africans could aid the economic development of Africa by implanting Christianity and developing commerce with the West African colonies of Liberia and Sierra Leone. Kofi, however, did not believe in mass repatriation. Rather, as a Quaker capitalist, he believed that only those with skills should be encouraged to move to Africa and make a contribution to the continent. Irregardless of his motives, Kofi pioneered the repatriation movements of the 19th century and advanced the cause of African-American nationalism by shifting nationalist fervor from Haiti to Africa. That stood out to me first because, the author called him like a capitalist. And the first thing I saw was kind of the blueprint of repatriation movements following this, because this is kind of a thing of where we're going to add to Africa, right? We're going over there to develop this, or bring Christianity, you're saying, and develop commerce. And it's this kind of this mission that we're going to go back and build it up. And so I see like a continuous link from there. But I was going to ask, what the class think about him saying he did not believe in mass repatriation? That kind of reminded me of Garvey, because I think Garvey said the same thing. Everybody's not going to come back. But do you think that this is a mistake? Like, it should be mass, or should it be kind of? It sounds like it's almost like a class with a special skill going over there to build up, or should it be like kind of a mass-based thing? If anybody got any comments on that?
It definitely reminds me of Garvey, but also what reminds me is the idea of us civilizing Africans. That also reminds me of Garvey. I think a lot of our leaders, unfortunately, had that perspective or fell into that perspective, and I don't think Garvey was a exception to that. Um, but I don't know if mass repatriation is even practical or even desirable. I think at this point we should be looking at developing a African world order, or where there may be a main base, or like a Pan African state in Africa. But wherever Africans are at, we should be seeking autonomy wherever there's a super majority of Africans. Whether we're talking in the southern eastern part of the United States, or whether we're talking Haiti, um, wherever there's a super majority, we should be seeking autonomy and connecting it to Africa, as opposed to everyone trying to relocate to the continent.
Yeah, yeah. I think that part of this was just the times that they were in, right? I mean, people were raised in Christian America, so it's kind of like there was a little bit of that mindset going on into going back, kind of re-civilizing the continent and stuff like that. But it did go into how the American Colonization Society kind of also played a role in that, because one of the big issues that they were discussing here was how a lot of these early efforts didn't have the financial backing to really execute this mission of repatriation. And so the American Colonization Society provided a lot of financial backing, which then caused some people to have to shift their rhetoric, right? And then having to work with, the state, so to speak, or the American government to help in this process. And so, I thought that was something that played a huge significant role, because you saw some of the mission change. And they've talked about this very well here, right? Colonization versus repatriation, right? And he explains here, colonization was not synonymous with repatriation. Colonialization was a direct result of racism and its resultant African American removal schemes. The same powerful group of industrialists and politicians who controlled the slave economy in the United States controlled the colony in Africa. Although repatriation represented a legitimate outgrowth of African American nationalism, it was unable to develop freely without any influence from advocates of colonization. White supremacy and its concomitant I don't know how to say that word. It's concomitant endorsement of separation among the races influenced repatriation efforts as well. So I just want to know what people's thoughts was on that, right? Because I hear about that today. The people going back to the continent, and it's a mixture of ideals. And I think it also plays a role in its failures not having this financial backing. But what do you guys think about the influence that the American Colonization Society had on early repatriation efforts?
Peace and power to everyone. This is Brother Quasi. um, there's a lot to discuss around the historical role that the repatriation or the colonization society had on the repatriation movement. It was more like they organized it and led it themselves, similar to the NAACP. They organized it, they led it themselves. It wasn't necessarily a African-led agenda or initiative. You had several of these white liberals, so to speak, and these white businessmen who decided to invest in sending Africans back to the continent. So these things were not spearheaded by blacks. Therefore, they're going to be met with minimal success, until Garvey came along and, gave a different agenda. As far as, the idea of repatriation, for me, it's the best solution. It's the only viable solution, but we need a committee of like-minded people to strategize and figure out how to do it best. Garvey created a movement and people were following him. So when the movement died, or when Garvey was taken out, the movement died. So as you were talking and going through the material, I was just thinking of like even a name for a national coalition to begin planning and preparing for repatriation. The same way we have these organizations working together to discuss reparations. I think we should have an organization working together to discuss repatriation. I don't know of any personally. I know there are so many who have already moved back to the continent on their own or even in small groups, but there's not a push to organize people to leave the continent. It's like people go over there, they get established, and then they want to charge other people for an idea. Like, hey, look, I'm in Ghana, I'm set up, I'm a chief, making money. Buy my how to repatriate plan for $9.99. And you got folk all over the continent doing that.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
like that
I
idea
definitely-
though of creating a political almost party, so to speak, like almost non-part. Well, it would probably have to have some kind of ideological concept to it, but just something that we all get together and we're saying, hey, this is what it should look like. This is a new program going into the 21st century, how we should move forward doing this.
Right. I just wanted to contribute to what the brother was saying. The first half of what he was mentioning about the American Colonization Society, the text even goes into how they contributed to, I would say they contributed to the issues in places like Liberia, because ultimately the board of the American Colonization Society was in control over that project, although the text states that the blacks who were sent there had some political power. Ultimately, they didn't have ultimate power. So I'm sure that contributed to issues there as well. And the brother's position of repatriation being the ultimate solution is interesting because it relates to what the author stated, which is in this text he was looking at repatriation as a higher form of black nationalism,
Right.
or like that's the next step to it. So I thought that was interesting from the author's perspective as well, because I don't know how I feel about it. It's like repatriation as the highest form or the next step. But I think it's interesting because the brother's perspective would kind of align with that.
Well, how do we feel about that? Because I was gonna recommend that we start to shift the conversation and say, like what he was just saying, how some people are charging for their repatriation plan. I was gonna say we might call that colonization versus repatriation. Repatriation is the extension of our of a specific ideology, not attached to white supremacy, capitalism, or whatever we want to call the colonization of it. Or we could say colonialization is probably aid from others, but repatriation is a continuation of our self-determination. So it's controlled by us. I almost wanted to make that distinction. And so when we critique others, it's almost like, it'll give us a sharper way to look at that and say, well, we think you're adding to colonialization, or would now be neo-colonialization, and it doesn't look like repatriation as we're putting it here. But what are our thoughts on repatriation, on that, what I just said, in that repatriation is the highest form of black nationalism? and I can go if you don't want to go. I feel like I agree with it because I honestly believe that um blacks it's almost like as long as we're asking and as long as we're well, as long as we're in this position to say, hey, please let us in, if that's controlling our narrative, like we checked in the book and I was about to jump over to Haiti, but it's like not even Haiti, but it's like the way that they controlled the narrative, even with repatriation, right? It's like we want to get rid of the Negro. There's some of them saying they're never as civilized to join in with us. So let's tell them where they need to go, type stuff. Or you know, it seems like they always want to be in control. And as long as they have that control over that territory, I feel like we're always going to be like in this domesticated dog position. You know what I mean? Like they always gonna want to try to hold us, or they want to always gonna try to make sure we're contained to some extent. And I feel like a leaving will allow us the space to say we are controllers of our own destiny. You know, we're leaving not because you want us to leave, but we're leaving because we want to say we're self-governed and we should govern like this. You know what I mean? And I mean, part of me feels like we could do it in our own communities, but to the fullest extent, well, we think it for ourselves, not even in terms of politics, but in philosophy, you know, thinking for ourselves, producing for ourselves. It could probably only happen outside of the States.
I'm not sure. I would need a more clarifying understanding of repatriation because I'm hesitant on terms of practicality. Like, do we think that repatriation, at least in a mass sense, is actually practical, and also would the masses of Africans want to repatriate? Because I'm not even sure that this is something that would inspire Africans to repatriate. Um, I'm not sure. Like as far as like repatriation, are you meaning just a considerable amount, or do you mean just you know whole regions?
Well, it's funny you said inspired, man. And I didn't want to jump across, but you know, when we talk about the Haitian Revolution, where we get into this later on, right? You know, this book gets into heavy on how the Haitian Revolution inspired repatriation, right? Like he says here, the desire to reconnect with ancestral and traditional ties found expression in the drums of the African and Hispaniola in his or her military resistance to slavery and separation from Africa. As a result, African American nationalism found its birth in the 19th century in the Haitian Revolution. So I think when we are talking about inspiration, I think we have to look at the times we're in as well, right? And because I think also in the text they said how repatriation, its approval and its disapproval went up whenever whites would kind of give us certain concessions. When it looked like it's gonna work with whites, people are like, I ain't going nowhere, you know.
Right.
but then you know, when the oppression rises, people are like, well, maybe we should get out of here. And so I think for me that when you say inspired, like that's one of the biggest things that probably has to take place is a type of inspiration that would push more people to come, you know. But I think there has to be like Kwasi was saying, like an organization that can maintain a connection to make it happen. You know what I mean? But so that's number one is I believe in forming a type of group or an ideology that can inspire people to move in that direction and keep it going over a constant basis. I guess so. Number one. I don't know. Did I answer a question?
Let me ask, Brother Bomani, when you mention a mass of people, what are you referring to?
I just mean like a large number, like a considerable percentage from a let's say
Okay.
like the southeastern United States.
Okay. What is the general idea as far as a mass of people? And are you talking about the ability to just move a whole bunch of people, or are you talking about a majority of people? When you talk about the masses, what does that mean specifically?
I'm not even speaking about like the ability, because I don't think necessarily that it would be a technological issue. I think it would be more of the people actually wanting to remove themselves. So I'm talking more of like a motivation type of thing. Like, will people actually want to repatriate in a large scale?
Yeah. So I get it now, but I would caution with that thinking because um, we're so when we look at any idea that is designed to be a move toward liberation, especially um, a radical or revolutionary type of movement, you're probably talking about 100,000 black people out of the 50 million in the country. And I don't think it's even wise to consider numbers, but more so a movement or a vehicle being in place when people see the need to go. As of now, today, April, what is it, April 14, 2023, the average black person in America doesn't consider themselves African and more so don't feel the need to leave the society. But if we have a vehicle in place and if we are invested ourselves in repatriating, then we promote what we're trying to do. And when the time comes where conditions in the country are so horrible, people will begin to look for solutions. And the most viable solution would be to leave if you want to live. And I say that because
Mm.
as conditions get worse in the country, um, we could potentially end up in a second civil war. Um, we're already facing the extreme violence. There's constant shootings, mass shootings, poverty, unemployment. So we can predict a continued decline of this society. So you just have to have a logical question. Do you want to stay here and fight to live, literally fight to live, or do you just want to leave and take your chances building the society that you want in another part of the world? Because we get caught up in trying to change America when we could just leave and literally build the type of society we want without any pushback. And that potential is there because other people are doing it.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely find merit in what you're saying. I think it's interesting, and I can draw some agreement from it, from perspective of we know that everyone's not going to be motivated that Pan-Africanism is even the solution. As you mentioned, some people don't really like to associate themselves with Africa or being African. So fortunately, we're not all going to make it. So maybe my mistake is the mass part, looking at it from a mass perspective. But I don't know. That's just the way I usually think. Masses of the people. That's just it's just in my lingo. But I can see how maybe that's causing an issue in me as far as seeing it, the practicality of it. Um, because we're not all going to make it. Some of us is always going to be attached to this country.
Correct.
And also, I want to say that like I want to read this part here where it said slavery therefore formed the backdrop to the creation of African American nationalist ideology and its offspring, repatriation, the struggle among free Africans to maintain their humanity in the face of dehumanizing forces, give impetus to racial identification and national pride. Throughout the 19th century, free Africans expressed their identification with Africa by referring to themselves as Africans and using the word Africa in the names of their organizations. Although the majority chose to remain in America, they retained their identification with Africa. Many free Africans even chose to refer themselves as Africans, i.e., the Free African Society, African Aid Society, and African Methodist Episcopal Church, right? But then you go down the bottom as free Africans became more integrated into the American society, they lost their identification with Africa and accepted racial characterizations such as Negro, a term that was created by Europeans to legally distinguish Africans from themselves. Inevitably, the dream of African identity became merged into the ambiguous American dream. Once the decision had been made to seek social equality in America, African American interest in Africa declined and was only rejuvenated during periods of intense crisis and oppression. So, I mean, back to Kwasi's point, you can kind of predict, that when oppression comes, like intense crisis and oppression, there's probably going to be a rising interest in going back. But I always promote the idea has to be more self-governance, in my opinion, and not just necessarily reaction to oppression. Because if we thought of ourselves as trying to become a self-determined people, it would make more sense to want to have our own eventually. You know what I mean? Instead of just reacting to, how do we become self-governed? Because I don't, you would have to be American. You have to accept yourself as American and deny yourselves as an African, right? And if you do that, then if you accept yourself as American, then you don't mind being governed and controlled by, you identify with the American government. And I think that's one of the big reasons why I push the African identity. And that's one of the big reasons why I still maintain a kind of separatist stance, because I'm like, we still need to push for our self-governance and not just bound down to these folks. Because I think from then till now, this continued oppression upon us, right, is going to continue. And we're going to always be in this position unless we kind of move forward, in our own way. But
It's a good point. I have a question for Brother Momani. Just kind of clear out some mechanics. Do you consider yourself to be a new African with the goal of forming the Republic of New Africa?
I don't mind going by the name New African. I don't mind going by that. Um, I wouldn't say that my goal is the Republic of New Africa. My goal is just it's a Pan African nationalist state. Um, so I want to say it's entirely in line with the Republic of New Africa because I think that they're more of they have more of a socialist perspective, and I'm a nationalist. So I would just say my goal is a Pan African state and a New African world order.
Now, I ask is it's important, having these conversations with people who hold those ideas as regards to having a portion of North America. I find it very difficult to have these repatriation conversations, even with people who already have in their minds that claiming territory in the United States, southern United States, is their vision. So that's why I'm just asking, is that a part of your vision, your personal vision for the future, whether it's the Republic of New Africa or not? Do you feel that that should be an ultimate goal, is having independent control over states on this North America.
Okay, yeah, to that question, I would say yes. I believe that Africans anywhere who are a majority in their region have the right to self-determination, have the right to sovereignty. So whether they're in in the southern eastern part of America, or whether in Haiti, wherever they're at, if there's a majority of African people, I believe that we should be pushing towards autonomy and having self-determination.
So therefore, the idea of repatriation to the continent of Africa would almost be a contradiction in terms. And I say contradiction meaning something that you have, an idea you have to struggle around. Would that be correct?
Um, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm against it, but I don't feel that it's necessarily the ultimate or ultimate solution. I'm not there yet.
Understood.
Okay. For me, the control over certain territory is about cultural sovereignty. And that's to try to shift the consciousness, to say, okay, this is who we are. Okay, we're here and we're trying to maintain ourselves. But it's almost like ultimately, how do we connect it to something more so? I wanted to answer the question too. That's how I feel about it. Because it's almost like you have to deal with the immediate problems here, but there should be a greater kind of move towards somewhere else. But I do think like establishing a cultural basis, to get a different concept going, like a part of this nationalism and orienting ourselves towards something else. So yeah. All right. So okay, so moving on. The Haitian Revolution, the genesis of African American nationalism. I really enjoyed this because I felt like it was just a quick shot at the Haitian Revolution and its connection to nationalism and what I think is Pan-African nationalism. And it showed really the force that the influence, the impact that revolution had on the minds of African people everywhere, right? And so here we see, he says the most important result was the establishment of the first African nation state in the Caribbean in the 19th century. Second, the Haitian Revolution proved to the millions of slaves in the Western Hemisphere that freedom could be achieved through militant agitation and armed struggle. Finally, it created a climate of hope for both free and enslaved Africans who dream and plan for an eventual exodus from America, leading to the creation of African repatriation movements that were primarily centered in Liberia, West Africa. I've always wondered why people didn't think about repatriating or kind of moving in mass towards Haiti. I wonder what made everybody look towards Liberia and not necessarily Haiti, which just won this struggle. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts around that.
The main thing is language and dominance already in the area. Liberia already had a considerable influence from the English, and there were already relationships that were established there between England, the Dutch, and the United States of America. So it just kind of made it easier, right? Going into Haiti, you're looking at a French dominated population. So there's a language barrier. And then also the type of governance that was in place was during the revolution, it was a authoritarian military type of regime that was in governance. And then it was still unstable. You still had slave labor taking place, even after the revolution was over. The Christophe took power after Dessalines. They put the Africans back to work in the fields on the plantations. Yeah, so that wouldn't be a good idea.
go back into slavery, right? Okay. All right. Yeah, that's why you gotta know the whole story. It makes sense too, because probably the colonization society probably already had some stuff going, so it probably was looked at as easier. Now I think about it. With that being said, we'll move on to International Echoes of Freedom and Equality. And again, I reiterate, the book says on July 14th, 1789, 2 years before the revolt of the Africans in Santo Domingo, French workers stormed the Bastille in Paris and demanded liberty, equality, and fraternity. When the workers rose in the revolutionary protest in France, they did not envision that Africans in the French colonies of Santo Domingo, Martinique, and Guadeloupe would become allies in their struggle. Nevertheless, pressure among the French began to mount for change in the colonies. In Paris, an organization called Friends of the Blacks began a campaign for voting rights for mulattoes in the colonies. These efforts to give mulattoes the right to vote for representatives to the colonial assemblies caused many planters to threaten succession from France, right? And I forgot to read this first part here, but by the end of the 18th century, the Western world was saturated with philosophical notions of freedom, right? And that's to go to the point earlier. These kind of revolutions were happening, like they said, throughout the Western world. So I think that also played a key part, right? And even in the success in the Haitian Revolution. So I think even when we visit any one of our ideologies, right, we have to always pay attention to the times that we're in and what could lead to, a success and failure globally. And in an odd case, of revolutions that were going on in France also added to the Haitian Revolution. So I was going to ask, what does this mean for us in terms of internationalism and allies, right? Because in a sense, the French played a major role, right, in helping this thing happen, or at least the French Revolution. So should we consider that when we're talking about repatriation? Should we consider somebody else? I don't know, like if Russia or China or something is engaging in a struggle, and you know what I'm trying to ask? Should we understand that and look for kind of allies that may help in our repatriation struggle?
We should definitely be aware of what's going on geopolitically. We should be aware, for instance, what's going on between NATO and Russia, what's going on between the alliance with China and these other, what they call BRICS. Um, we should be aware of these things and how they may relate to our struggle. What's going on in Israel with the Palestinians, all that. We should definitely be aware of what's going on geopolitically, because all of that affects what goes on domestically. Things internationally affects what goes on domestically. And of course, if we're looking at ourselves as nationalist people, nations have allies, strategic allies. That's what nations do. So we can always look toward having strategic allies, though we should always primarily depend on ourselves. Um, Allies or strategic relationships is definitely something to look towards when it makes sense.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
I agree with that too, man. Sometimes you just got to think militarily. And if the times did help to, I guess I don't know if you guys agree with that, but I'm taking that the times helped inspired revolution. So is the equal and opposite true? Can times help prevent revolution? Despite all of our activities, all of our fantastic study groups, our fantastic agitation, political education, can the times prevent a revolutionary situation, or in this case, repatriation, things that we're talking about? And I can give a quick answer. I think it can. I think the times can have a significant impact. because it could shift consciousness, right? It could shift consciousness to the left or the right. It could have an influence on what people deem is important, and what people think is not important. So I think at times of neoliberalism, although we may try to do our best to say, hey, this thing is bad, people may just the propaganda may work. They may not care about what's going on. They may care about just the car or whatever, or maybe just living. Let me not try to play it off like that. They may be more concerned with direct survival, and all of that, right? So, and also later on in the text, CLR James was talking about the hardcore oppression of slavery, right? Which also caused them to have a deep resentment against them, and then we might look at something like America, and although bad stuff happens, right? Maybe some people are still comfortable in the global north, right? And so that might have a reason as to why something is not, you know, where we think it should be at. Any thoughts?
I totally agree with that there. Um, we always talk about conditions. Conditions have to be ripe for anything to take place. And, as far as social conditions right now, let me say this. I think the ideas we got from the 60s and the 70s about political education, agitation, mobilization, organization, raising awareness, and raising consciousness have just been flawed drastically because they never related to the Black experience in America. A lot of this material and these ideas come from other places that had actual material struggles taking place. Um, After slavery and going into the Jim Crow era, civil rights era, American apartheid, uh, going into the 70s and 80s, much of what we considered racial oppression had pretty much been wiped out. The society completely flipped. When integration comes in and we have the ability to get jobs in our own land, like the Black liberation struggle ended. And we just been in a weird place since the late 70s. It's not perfect in America. We still see how the effects of Jim Crow and enslavement have on us today. Um, but we are a minority in this country, and there are far too many of us that believe America is the best place and the most free and the best, most prosperous place in the world. So we have to really look at the history of material analysis and why it's important when we come up with ideas on how to do things and how to get the results that we're looking for. Um, the real revolutionaries are waiting and planning for the moment when the majority of the Black population in America is dissatisfied and is looking for an answer. If that makes sense.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what both of you were stating, I do think that times play a significant role. I also understand that conditions are definitely relevant, but George Jackson comes to mind when he stated that we have to create the conditions. So we have to create the environment or the atmosphere for what action needs to be done. Because as you mentioned, we should have had revolution yesterday, and every day that goes by where we don't, there are people who are suffering unjustly, needlessly.
Mm.
So I would come at it at that perspective more because I feel like it's more of an active perspective, like we're trying to create something that's supposed to waiting on it.
Mm,
But I'm under no illusion. I understand that we're not in a revolutionary moment.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. You know, I think I would probably agree with your last statement because under no illusion, we got to understand where we're at. I don't. I think we could. I think that's where people try to expose the contradictions. I think that my old socialism is kicking in because I think that's what I learned. That right, try to expose the contradictions, and hopefully that leads to upliftment of consciousness. Um, but I'm, not disagreeing with your statement. I'm just thinking I don't know if we can actually create a revolutionary situation. I'm just not sure, but yeah, yeah. Quasi, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we have the conversation a lot. Um, I don't know, man. People get upset when you say certain things, don't like you being disrespectful to ancestors and elders, but um, a lot of that stuff just, it just sounded good during the '60s. It was uplifting, it was motivating, it was inspiring. During that time where racial what's the word I'm looking for? Where racial conflict was high and people were looking for a sense of belonging and purpose and some equality. And again, when you sit down and you put these things on paper and you think about it, it's like, and I ask people this question all the time: what is the ultimate objective or vision for a Black revolution in America? We are a small population of Black people in this country. And then you think about those who are radical or who are anti capitalist, anti imperialist, man, you talking about like 5,000 people probably. Like, there's not many of us who think this way. So you're not going to convince people that America is not working for them when they can go to work every day and drive a Mercedes or, eat at Chili's and Chick-fil-A and Starbucks every day. You're not going to convince these people that they're not free and that they don't have equality and that America's not working for them. Even the dope boys on the corner, like I just shared this case in New York. They just round up like 100 young brothers, 18 to 22, like 100 of them. I'm like, you're not going to convince them that what they're doing is pointless because they see it paying off. You know, robbing, shooting, killing, selling drugs, or working for IBM or Wells Fargo or Citibank. Like, we're not going to convince people that life is bad. Material conditions have to actually get to a point where people feel completely hopeless. And that's when a vanguard steps in and says, well, we need to do this or we need to do that. Um, and that's what worked in Haiti. The enslaved Africans were revolting all the time. I did very deep study in Haiti. They were revolting all the time. Like, there's no point in the history of enslavement on that island where there were not massive slave revolts. Like Nat Turner, we got Nat Turner as our only real slave revolt, right? But there were Nat Turners springing up all over the island constantly. But it wasn't until France had a revolution and there was a famine, crops were bad on the island at the same time. And then this idea of liberation coming from France to Haiti. Those material conditions made the people actually organize. So you went from having these random slavery revolts to an organized revolution to completely overtake the island. Um, that's just not a reality for us in America. Like this just, people say don't say anything's impossible, but like, come on, like we gotta get real. Like, so I always encourage people to go out in the public and just talk to Black people and see what's on their minds. And with most of us is, how am I going to get the bag? How am I going to get more money? You can talk to them about capitalism as the reason why they don't have the money they want. But then again, when you ask them why they want the money, it's because they want the same American dream. Like, they don't want the money to be free. They want the money to go buy stuff.
Right, right. So from your perspective, would it be more for those of us who are um insurrectionists or revolutionaries or Pan-Africanists, would it be more useful for us to focus our energies in other places outside of America where the material conditions may be more um, susceptible to our politics? And if so, where would you say that is? Or what places would you say that may be?
So for us as Africans in America, um, and again, each his own, but just from my perspective, um, I don't believe that the ideas of revolution or insurrection make much sense, especially when we can go. Really, you only have to go to Africa. We don't even have to go to Africa. We're at a global place right now where you can literally go anywhere in the world and create the life that you want. So the ideas of struggling to overthrow a system just doesn't make sense to me. It sounds like a person has a death wish. And some people adopt that as like a quote unquote warrior type of mentality. Well, I'm going to fight for the liberation of my people somewhere in the world. If that's what moves you, then that's your choice. But I want to live and I want my children to live. And I know that there's a chance that we can create the life we want somewhere else in the world where they literally can be whoever they want to be without having to die for it. Um, but that's me, that's my thing. But if someone says they want to engage in an actual armed revolutionary conflict, um, you just got to find where it's happening in the world. And as long as capitalism and imperialism are molding and shaping societies, that's gonna always, there's always gonna be a need to overthrow some evil regime. Um, yeah, I don't think I have an answer for that outside of outside of that.
Appreciate it.
Man, this is the first time people do the reading and actually discuss. That's what I like. This is why I like coming together doing this. So with that being said, to go back to Haiti on this page, the what do we think about the leadership struggle of Toussaint Louverture? Because this is what the rest of the chapter is about. It's just looking at his general leadership, internal resistance, his demise, and then going into Dessalines and so on and so forth. But one of the most powerful things I read was that that the revolution was supposed to be for the people, right? And the grassroots struggle part, he says the revolution in Haiti developed amongst the masses. So that's what you were saying, Kwasi, about there was always things happening and people were always rebellion. So things developed amongst the masses. But then you've seen Toussaint kind of capture the moment, I think, or he's kind of like pushed into like a leadership position. And he makes these decisions, right? He makes these decisions. Sometimes he's trying to make the French happy a little bit. He's trying to like say, hey, look, you know, let's not do too much. I'm not going to invade Jamaica, right? I'm going to sit here and work on these reforms. And people felt that he kind of sold the people out, or kind of sold the struggle out.
I want to say real quick that
Go ahead, just jump in. Go ahead.
yeah, you hear about these particular characters in history when it comes to Haiti. When it comes to Toussaint, you hear different types of things. But when I read this surprised me because I didn't know it. But it also, I think, in some way, gave me a better understanding of Toussaint. So when
Okay.
I read that when the revolt began in 1791, Toussaint, a slave born to West African parents, refused to take part in it. In fact, he sheltered his master from the rebels. He later transported his master to safety, had a change of heart, and joined the rebels in the mountains. So that was something I did not know about Toussaint. I didn't know that he sheltered his master and refused to take part in the struggle to begin with. And I think that really just enlightened me on Toussaint as a human being, as an African, his story, why his story was the way he is. It has a lot to do with his origins, and his relationship with his master, who he obviously cared about a lot. So I just thought that was really interesting.
I was laughing at the way you said that, because I feel like you're saying like that played a role in why he was bound down to the French a little bit.
Yeah, I'm being tasteful, because I don't want to
Because it's the
disrespect.
ancestor.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, yeah. So just being tasteful, considerate, to the ancestors. So, well,
Yeah.
it was interesting. When I read that, I was like, whoa, wow, like I did that. That's interesting.
So, Pascal Robert on the show This Is Revolution, he's talking about a paper he wrote that goes into great depth. But I got like 5 books that I, did some significant research on the topic of Toussaint, and Pascal breaks it down. I started to write a paper on it, but Pascal has already done that work, and he has a lot more experience in research, and he's actually from Haiti himself. So I
Mm.
just stopped writing my paper, but he does a great job of explaining through primary sources how Toussaint was just a big head nigga. He was a what's the word I called somebody this the other day? Uh Damn, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh man. He was a honorary white man. He was
Mm.
Toussaint,
Oh, wow.
he was an honorary Frenchman.
I think they kind of said that here. If I could read
It's
it.
very clear. It's no secret about it. I mean, it's not like you got to dig up the information. Just read the primary sources. Like he bowed down to France. He wanted to put the Africans back in slavery. And even when they scripted their constitution, they put Catholicism at the top of it and ran a class-based society. So it's like, he usurped the movement from the enslaved Africans, and he organized it very well into a revolutionary movement. But the goal in his mind was to remove the white man and put the free blacks and mulattoes in charge.
Yeah, he says the central problem was one of control, right? As long as Toussaint saw himself as a representative of France, he continued to be a subject to France and its colonial policies. Oh no, that may not have been it, but yeah, no, I'm kind of surprised too, because it does kind of speak to his allegiance, his that mindset. What you guys are saying, it's not necessarily a secret. So, I just kind of wonder why he's kind of like celebrated still. I mean, some part of me wanted to say that maybe just being in a leadership position, sometimes you got to make tough decisions, right? And I always try to respect people because, you know, when you're in these situations, things that look so easy on the ground may not be so easy when you're actually in it. But I think we're hitting on a good point about where his mind was at, and people are proving that, you know, he wasn't really maybe that much of a hero, maybe like some people thought he was, or maybe some people who actually read never thought it in the first place.
And it also hit me when the text started to go into how he was when he started to lose his leadership because he killed I'm not sure to pronounce his name. I think it's Mosai.
Yeah.
Mosai. And when I read what Mosai wrote, when he said, "Whatever my old uncle may do, I cannot bring myself to be the executioner of my color. It is always in the interest of the metropoles that he scolds me, but these interests are those of the whites, and I shall only love them when they have given me back the eye that they made me lose in battle."
Mm.
And when they say when he went into the text explains how after he was killed, uh, and, um, he never got his leadership wasn't the same, which is why Napoleon realized he was weak and came in to try to overtake the island, and then hit me as well. Just imagining being in Mosai's from his perspective, being in his position, standing up for at that point for what the North the Africans at that time really wanted, but having to go against your own uncle, like that's just I don't
The
know.
masses felt like he turned his back on him.
Yeah.
And that's powerful. That's one of the things I wanted to discuss is kind of like, you know, the importance of that, of being in tune with the masses, because it didn't seem like he was in tune with them. And like you just pointed out, that opened up a weakness in which the enemy came in and exploited. You know, so that's an important lesson in staying in line with the will of the people. Yeah. And then we can go to Dessalines. I like was anything else y'all want to say? All right, so going into Dessalines, I think part of what Dessalines was saying, the militant leader Dessalines took charge of the revolution. He quickly earned back the support of the masses. On November 29th, 1803, Dessalines issued a preliminary proclamation of independence. On January 1st, 1804, he issued a final proclamation in which he claimed the independence of Santo Domingo and renamed the island Haiti, Tayano named for Land of Mountains. Moreover, he wanted to send a stern warning to the French that the revolution could not be compromised. He would not make the same mistakes as Toussaint by accommodating French colonists. Rather, he engaged in a deliberate campaign to kill all French on the island, including women and children. You know who I thought about when I read that?
That
Khalid Muhammad.
uh,
Remember, he said, "You got to kill the cracker babies. You got to kill the cracker woman." Y'all remember that? That was crazy. But who did you say?
I said Nat Turner.
Oh no, that reminded me of Khalid because he was talking about South Africa. He was, "You gotta kill the cracker woman, you gotta kill the cracker babies," and that was one of his speeches that got him in trouble, of course. But and then he, you know, in his new constitution for Haiti, he recognized universal freedom. It abolished slavery forever and prevented white men from becoming landowners. As a symbol of the new government, Dessalines prohibited the use of the term Negro and substituted black as an adjective to describe Haitians. I felt inspired off of that, to say the least. I was inspired because when I think of that revolutionary change, I think of a total change and something that's unapologetic and demanding. Like, this is who we are. We're coming through and we're not changing up. This isn't nice. And we say we want y'all gone. We want all of y'all gone, right? Like, we're not playing. I don't know if the same thing could happen today. Let me go ahead and state that. But I do like his ferociousness, right? Like his uncompromising nature and moving forward. But what do you guys think about this?
Yeah, I thought it was great. Tough but real,
Okay.
tough, Don't, it's tough, but it's what it is. It's reality, when you striving for complete sovereignty, there are some things that may happen which may not in a time of peace be considered ethical, but in a time of struggle is.
Right. I forgot to mention too with Mo's Low Over Shore, he said he realized that the redistribution of land had to form the foundation of the new nationalism. You know, I thought that was always powerful, land being, you know, something people ascribe to. All right. All right. I think that's it. I think that's the end of this chapter. While Haitian nationalism for many European Americans was to be feared, for some of the most prominent free Africans in the United States, it represented promise and freedom. On January 9th, 1826, John Brown Russwurm, on the eve of his graduation from Bowdoin College, wrote his European American uncle, John Summer, the following note: If not particularly invited by the Haitian government, then I shall study medicine in Boston previous to an immigration to Haiti. The social movement for African national independence would continue throughout the 19th century and become an inspiration for repatriation movements to Africa and a haven for Africans throughout the Western Hemisphere who desired to join an African majority and take control of the political and economic reins of their nation. One thing I did want to ask you guys was there might be a reason, I'm not sure, but he said he promised the British, Toussaint, going back to Toussaint, that he wouldn't invade Jamaica. And I instantly thought about this old socialist argument that I remember from Stalin and I think it was Trotsky. And the conversation went around building socialism in one nation versus keeping the revolution continuous. And I felt like Toussaint wanted to, really hold power in Haiti versus expanding that revolutionary struggle to other Black nations. I think he should have expanded the struggle. I guess we're understanding what the type of person Toussaint was, but do you guys think that that's important? Like continuing an influence of a struggle to inspire other nations, or do you think it's probably more important to build up a strong nation, or does it depend on the conditions?
It may depend, but I'm leaning towards it's important to build a strong base, a strong nation. Because it's hard enough that the struggle to get there would be hard enough. You don't want to lose it by thinning yourself or spreading yourself too far. But the point will be to get stable so that you can aspire and then you hand out to other struggles. It'd be just like Cuba, what Cuba has done for other nations outside of itself. Getting itself to a point where it can be stable and then helping African struggles and other struggles, but from its base in Cuba, it's sort of the same idea.
Is there anything else from the text you guys wanted to bring up, or just any final thoughts?
Just to answer your last question,
Okay.
globally, the U.S. the U.S. is the only real problem with African sovereignty and independence. The U.S. is the problem. As this country declines and other global powers advance, to the point Brother Bomani was saying, as a nation, you need allies. It just makes so much sense that African nations um, align themselves with Russia and China and whoever else and gain some real power. And that can be done without any military conflict. And it's going to be done without any military conflict. This country is run by a bunch of psychopaths who would do anything to keep power. But as far as us as Africans, I believe that from what we see forming around the globe right now, geopolitically speaking, our future is going to be on the continent. Whether we're there or we're investing or we're aiding and supporting, that's going to be the final frontier. And everyone else seems to understand that, but us. We're the only ones that don't get it.
All right. Anything else, Bomani? You good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, man. That's it, man. That's a good class, man. Thank you guys for participating, man. This was good. I learned some things. So for sure.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. Peace.
Peace. All right.
Peace.